a lot of young entrepreneurs feel like legal comes last. And say, I'm just getting this going, bootstrapping, credit cards, just trying to make something happen. I'll worry about legal down the road. I'll worry about insurance down the road and all that jazz. I just got to get enough business in the doors. What would be your advice, or what would you say to someone who's thinking that way?
Don't do it. It's a bad habit to get into. And once you do it and you get away with it, you're going to think you can do it continually, and you're going to put off hiring the lawyer, and you're going to put off dealing with the legal and financial issues too. A lot of new businesses don't want to hire an accountant either, because they're too expensive. So it's a bad habit to get into. And think of it this way: when you're starting a business, it's like building a house, and you want to make sure that the foundation has been laid properly. If you don't get the right professional advice at the outset, you're likely to build a house that's going to crumble at some point in time.
Yeah. And we've seen this time and time again in businesses. And I think first one of the first contracts that I've seen, and I've seen you help a lot of businesses do this, is really with partnership agreements and operating agreements. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of having those set up properly in the very beginning?
Absolutely. When partnerships are like marriages, and when you first start out with a new partner or a group of partners, there's that love affair, that time where everything's going to be great and we're all going to make a lot of money and we're all going to sing kumbaya at the end. Well, it very rarely turns out that way. And so by having a good operating agreement, assuming you're an LLC, if you're a corporation, it would be called a shareholders agreement, but it's basically the same type of document. And what that document does is it lays out all the parameters of operating the business. If you're a shareholder, what your rights are as a shareholder. If you're an officer, what your obligations are as an officer, how decisions are made within the organization, how you sell your interest in the organization, whether the organization is going to have a right of first refusal, or if somebody can just sell their interest to a complete stranger without the other partners having any ability to maybe buy that interest in advance. Those kind of issues become very important. Succession planning also typically gets included in those agreements. If, for example, a partner should die, what happens with the spouse? Does the spouse now become your new partner, or is there some provision in the agreement for handling that transition in ownership? So those are going to be some examples. Also, the other reason why an operating agreement is important is it also establishes your tax structure. You're going to have your accountant also weigh in on how you set up that document, because it's going to talk about things like how funds are going to be distributed amongst the ownership. And it also talks about, if you are an owner and you make a loan to the business, how that loan's going to be treated. Are you going to receive a priority repayment over other debtors? That sort of thing. So these operating agreements or shareholders agreements, depending upon what business form you're in, become very, very important in terms of how the business moves forward. It also becomes very important if a dispute arises later, because then you've got something that has already been agreed upon by all the partners in terms of a mechanism for how you're going to resolve that dispute.
Yeah. I had a conversation the other day, and someone said, "Hey, I need business insurance." And I said, "Okay, what kind of insurance are we talking about?" Right. I remember years ago, you told me that there was a spectrum of like shades of gray. Right. And you say it really just depends, like where on the spectrum you want to live, with how buttoned up and how comfortable you are, how much you can tolerate risk. Right. There's E&O and workers' comp and employee liability insurance. I mean, go down the list. There's so many different types of insurance. Kind of back to that question about being early stage, people figure out, well, I'll get to it when I get to it. I'll get to it when I have 5 employees. I'll get to it when a problem arises. How do we ensure we're insured? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a very big question, but let me start out in the beginning. Okay, you're a new business and you're debating whether to get insurance or not. Okay, if you don't get the insurance now and you start the business and then subsequently apply for the insurance company regards you as a higher risk, which means that you're more likely to see higher premiums as a result of that risky conduct that you took before, when you started the business without the insurance. So that's the first issue to consider. Second thing you need to recognize is, when you buy insurance, buy it from a broker, not an agent. Okay. Now there's a difference. An agent works for the insurance company. A broker is independent of the insurance company, and they have a fiduciary duty to you. Now, for those of you who don't know what a fiduciary duty is, it's the highest legal duty you can have. And it requires that the person put your interests ahead of their own. So if you're an insurance broker and you have clients, your duty is to make sure that you place that client with the best insurance at the best price with the best coverage that that client needs. And to the extent you're not doing that, you have a legal obligation to tell the client why you're not placing them with that coverage, or giving them the option to, choose not to use that coverage. So that's your obligation as a broker. So what I suggest for people to do when they're buying insurance is actually go to two different brokers, and don't tell the brokers that you're talking to each of them. You go to broker number one, you say, and use these words: I don't know anything about insurance, and I'm relying on you to get me the best insurance at the best price that covers me for everything. Now, if the broker doesn't stop you right there and say, well, no insurance covers you for everything, then you better start thinking, maybe I need another broker. Okay. But once you have that conversation with the broker and you send that broker number one off looking for insurance for you, okay, you document that in an email to that broker saying, this will confirm we talked earlier today, and I informed you I don't know anything about insurance, and I'm relying on you to find the best insurance at the best price that's going to cover me for everything, okay? And that way, if it turns out later that the broker didn't get the best insurance for you, and you get sued and you're not covered under the policy that the broker got, now you have a second course of action, and that is to sue the broker for malpractice, and arguably you'll get the coverage that way through the broker's E&O coverage. So that's strategy number one. Strategy number two is, the reason you use two brokers is because brokers have relationships with the underwriters at those different carriers. So broker number one might be able to get a better deal than broker number two on the same policy for the same coverages. So this is what you do. You tell broker number one, go find a policy. Broker number one finds a good policy. Now you go ask broker number two if they found that same policy. If they did, you check the premiums that are being quoted. If the premiums are different, you go to the broker who quoted the higher premiums and say, look, I had another broker find me this same policy for less money. How come he was able to get it and you weren't? That makes broker number one upset. He calls the underwriter at the insurance company. They argue for a few minutes, and then he gets a better price than broker number two. So that's how you pit the brokers against each other to arguably get maybe the best coverage you can for the best price.
So what kind of coverage would you recommend an early stage company? Let's say they've been in business.
Tim, that really is dependent in large part on the nature of the business. I mean, if it's a service-oriented business, the insurance coverages are going to be different, very different than it's a product-oriented business. Products are going to require a lot more different types of coverages. Then if you're an internet-based business, obviously you need to worry about coverage for like things like social media and advertising online and that sort of thing. So again, it behooves you to sit down and talk to a broker, tell them about what your business is. Now, one of the things the broker is going to ask for is a copy of your operating agreement. So that's another reason why you want to make sure that you get the operating agreement done early on in the formation of the business.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Insurance is a big thing I've learned through you. Thank you. The hard way. Let's talk a little bit about, like, what would you consider to be the number one landmine that you see business owners step on time and time and time again? When your phone rings, and you're like, 9 times out of 10, they're calling me because of this one thing. And I know you see a lot, but I'm asking you to really think about the top.
That's tough because I get so many unusual calls from so many different types of businesses. So I would say perhaps the most common landmine that I see, particularly with the startups, is being undercapitalized. They basically, as I understand the statistics these days, it's 1 in 5 startups fail in the first year because of poor financial management and being undercapitalized. So, making sure you have enough money to do what you set out to do would be, I would think, one of the bigger problems that I typically see. The other thing is really business planning. They're just, most business owners, they're so busy living in the moment, trying to get their products done and their services done or whatever, and hiring employees and managing them and doing everything you need to do to run the business, that thinking ahead and doing the strategic planning that you need to do ends up becoming a problem for these guys because they don't have the time to do it. They haven't made time to do it, and they lose direction. The business seems to flounder if they don't have any clear goals or clear metrics by which they can measure their growth and progress. So those seem to be the most common problems that I see with small businesses.
Yeah. I know in your article, and Ted posted a great article, I'll put it in the chat here if you haven't had a chance to read it. And I know you're talking a lot about
just a caveat there, folks. There were one or two typos in there I've since cleaned up, but Tim went ahead and sent it out before I gave him the cleanup version. So that's okay. I mean,
I'll repost the one without typos.
Most of you probably won't even pick up the typos, but I tend to be a perfectionist. So
yes, that's true. You're talking about California, laws
yes.
in California, and we have business owners all across the board here. So, regulations are an issue. Economic factors, technology, AI, data privacy, cybersecurity, supply chain issues, employee issues, partner, right? You just go down the list. I mean, there's so many. It's hard once you start when your business starts to grow, you're like, how do I ensure that I'm always protected? And I remember a long time ago, you said, well, you just have to basically always be prepared to be sued, because at any time, the bigger you get, the more that it's coming for you, right? Can you talk a little bit about getting in the right mindset to be prepared to be in a position to where it's going to be coming for you, but you're just really prepared versus trying to avoid a lawsuit entirely?
Sure. This is one of those areas where most business owners really don't think ahead, and they don't really incorporate this kind of risk management into their business planning. But it is important to recognize you're a target, okay? You're a business owner, you're a deep pocket as far as people that don't run businesses think, okay? And if you have insurance, that's great. That'll give you some comfort and some peace of mind at night that, that if you do get sued, you've got the protection you need to fend off that liability. But understand there are all kinds of lawsuits out there. And, now we've got, the soup to sure this now is the accessibility lawsuits that are being filed by these plaintiffs' attorneys. And what they do is they end up suing you for these de minimis amounts, like $5,000 or something like that, because they know it's cheaper for you to pay them than it is to hire a lawyer and defend these kind of actions. And often these kind of actions that they're bringing are not necessarily covered under insurance. So, and if they are, then that you might have a deductible. So there's a mindset you have to develop as a business owner that you're a target, and that you have to do whatever you can through planning and insurance to mitigate those exposures. But at the end of the day, you're going to get sued. I mean, just expect it. Somebody's going to trip and fall in your shop, or one of your competitors isn't going to like what you're doing and they're going to turn around and sue you, or some plaintiff's attorney is going to identify you as a target because your stairway isn't the right height or whatever, and you're not accessible to people with disabilities. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why somebody might sue you out there. You just have to develop a mindset. Okay, take your best shot. I'm ready for you. I've got the insurance. I've got my ducks all in line. Okay. Yeah. Now the biggest issue for most employers are going to be the lawsuits by your employees. Okay. Those internal lawsuits. And those are the most problematic, because if you haven't crossed your T's and dotted your I's in terms of maintaining your employee handbook, your employee engagement contracts, your employee policies. And here in California, these employment laws are changing literally every year. So one of the ways you can mitigate your exposure there is by using third-party vendors. And a lot of small businesses do that, like ADP, whatnot, offers now an HR component and whatnot. But that doesn't resolve you or, of your job to maintain, information current on what's going on in this area of the law. Even though you've delegated it to someone else, you still need to understand what's going on in the law in this area, particularly because it's so dangerous for employers.
Yeah. And the cousin of this conversation is piercing the corporate veil.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of business owners get real concerned, because they're like, well, if I get sued for anything, stupid reasons that we see time and time again, can they take my house? Can they take all the money in my bank account? Like, what can they do? How do I protect myself from allowing some stupid lawsuit to come through and then take everything that is, personally owned? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. For those of you unacquainted with the term, piercing the corporate veil means basically not allowing the business to protect you or insulate you against liability. Right now, the reason we form LLCs or corporations in part is so if we get sued, the business gets sued, but we don't personally get sued. Our personal assets are safe because the business is regarded as a separate legal entity under the law. However, there's a caveat with that, and that's called piercing the corporate veil. Now, when can an opposing party pierce the corporate veil? It's when you don't adhere to corporate formalities, okay? So how many of you run LLCs and don't have an annual meeting? Even though you might be the only partner in the LLC, do you have an annual meeting? You should document it, okay? Do you have, when you do have meetings, do you have minutes of those meetings? Is there any record that you've been adhering to corporate formalities? Or are you treating the business like your alter ego? Okay, like it's just a part of you, an extension of you, where you're commingling your private money with the business's money. You're not keeping two separate accounts. That kind of thing becomes very, very dangerous, and it enables a plaintiff's attorney to basically make the argument that because your business is really just you, you should personally be liable for any damages that are in excess of your insurance coverage, if you have any, for that particular claim.
I can keep asking you questions. We can keep talking, but we're pushing up on our 30 minutes here, and I want to make sure we get questions answered. So before
Sure.
we open this up, can you tell folks, and thank you so much for sharing even just that brief moment of wisdom, how do people get a hold of you? How do people typically work with you?
I don't market myself at all. I don't have a website. I haven't had one in 3 years. I think they're a waste of money. I only take people by referral only. But because you're all associated with Tim, I will regard you as a referral from Tim. You can reach me at my email. Now, this is going to give you a clue as to what kind of dinosaur I am. I still use an AOL account, okay? And it's T Horton-Billard. It's my name, all one, no spaces. THORTONBILLARD @AOL.com.